Good morning and welcome back to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, James Splitsuit Sweeney, and today we're going to discuss off-table stuff and how to think about some decisions off-table to make sure that your real-time decision-making is that much sharper. Now, this isn't exactly the sexiest topic. People want to talk about the hardcore strategy, and I get that, but you have to remember that the stuff you do between sessions is going to impact your real-time decision-making, and that is very, very important at the end of the day. So what we're going to do is analyze a bunch of questions that were asked on the Red Chip Poker Discord. You can always join today, ask your own questions, share hands, and have fun with a poker community that loves poker as much as you do. redchippoker.com/discord to join for free. And we're just going to fire through a bunch of these questions now. So let's get started. All right, this first question comes from Boring Name, and they ask the following. What do you do when you have scheduled grind time? Let's just say from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., but one day, it's 9 a.m., you open up the lobbies, and suddenly there are very few tables worth playing compared to your default grinding parameters. Tables available times limits. Do you still play? Let's just say 4 instead of 8 tables. Do you play 4 but then start doing something else on the side, maybe studying, or do you reschedule to later if you're free? What about the opposite situation, where it's 11 a.m., time to end the session, but you're having such awesome tables full of whales? Do you remain disciplined and get off, or do you still play for some time? So this is a really excellent question that I know a lot of people don't really want to talk about, but it's important whether you play recreationally, even if you only play once or twice a month, or if you're playing a couple times a week, or if you're playing pretty much full time. This is still a question that every single person is going to have to come to, and there are a couple different thought processes around this, a couple different models that I think are worth exploring. So let's take a moment and kind of crack those apart right now. So I'm going to lay out two major models, and let's just give them names just so we have something to anchor to. Let's call it flex mode and business mode. So flex mode is you are going to play whenever the games are good, and if you have, say, a schedule, you might have to end up breaking that because you have to be flexible, that's the name, and you play when the games are good, you quit when they're not good, and you're always looking for good games. Whereas business mode is, hey, I have a set structure and schedule, and I'm going to stick to that. And there are pros and cons to both of these. So for flex mode, the biggest upside is that you're always looking for good games, you're playing when the games are good, and if the games continue to be good for a long period of time, you continue playing them, exercising your edge as long as you have the ability to do so. That is why you need that kind of flexibility. And the obviously upside of that is that you're playing in good games more often than not, which is wonderful. And if the games just aren't good or there's not very much running, then you just go to other stuff, be that study or obviously non-poker stuff, take care of your body, your food, your mind, etc. So you have to have some flexibility baked into that. And that works for some people and it doesn't work for others. And there's obviously a lot of downsides to this, because the downside is that you might feel this like nagging internal feeling of like, well, I have to be looking for good games at all times because, well, games could be good. Maybe they're good right this moment. Maybe they'll be good in 30 minutes. So you're like constantly checking, seeing what's up, seeing if certain players are online that you want to play against. So it can really create this kind of like internal nagging of, hey, I have to be thinking about poker or ready to play poker on a dime at all times. And for some people, that's going to work. For a lot of people, that might not necessarily feel so great. And because you don't have kind of a set cutoff time, if a game is continuing to be good for a long period of time, or you get a fish heads up to yourself, whatever it is, you might end up playing very, very long sessions, which means you could have interrupted sleep, you could have things like family plans or non-poker related responsibilities that get pushed to the side. If you do that too much, that can obviously be detrimental. So it can really kind of look very, very degenerate to quite a few people, especially people that don't understand what the heck you're doing. So there are definitely downsides to this. A lot of upsides in terms of money-making potential, but a lot of downsides in terms of the way that you might be feeling outside of poker specifically. Now, business mode, on the other hand, is pretty much the exact opposite of all of this. It kind of looks more like the original question of there is a set time and poker fits exactly in there, and if the game is really, really good, it doesn't matter. Once it's quitting time, you stop and you're done, you move on, and poker comes back in whenever poker is next scheduled. So obviously the upside of that is that you know exactly when poker is going to be, both the on switch and the off switch to it. But the downside is that you could easily miss out on good profitable games, right? If a game is really, really fishy, but all of a sudden it's, clock's ringing, all of a sudden it's quitting time, you have to leave that game because that's kind of what business mode would follow. And as such, you will miss out on profitable opportunities to maybe have like the biggest home run sessions possible, that sort of thing. So the upside, works for a lot of people that have other obligations and want to maintain a little more balance in their life. The downside is you miss out on some profit making potential. So again, you really have to think about kind of what your life looks like right this moment. If you're a younger single person who doesn't have children, doesn't have a family, doesn't have responsibility like that, flex mode might work a little bit better. Whereas if you have a lot of different obligations, you have other things, especially if poker isn't full time for you, business mode is probably going to make a little bit more sense. And for most people, honestly, going business mode is probably going to be the better decision. I know most people listening to this podcast are not full-time players. Maybe the idea of that is alluring, but at the end of the day, you have a lot of things going on right this moment, a lot of responsibilities to handle. Poker can't just randomly slide into a 24-hour grind session because the games are super soft, and as such, sticking to something like business mode can be very good for you. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning that the downside potential for both of these models is quite different. Right, the downside potential on the business mode is that you're going to miss out on some profit. Okay, that sucks, but it is what it is. We're always missing out on things that could be making us profit, just in life and poker in general. Whereas the downside of flex mode is that you can get yourself into very degenerate behavior quite quickly, right? Because all of a sudden you're skipping social obligations, you might just become quite antisocial overall, you can easily just start feeling like a lot of internal stress, because again, you have to be hunting for that next profit-making potential, because there's always profit-making potential somewhere, there's always some edge to try to go capture, and things like taking care of your body, your health, your sleep can start slipping very quickly, and it's one of those that can slip into some of the darker aspects of kind of massive imbalance in a life, not just in poker, but just in general. So the downside potential is pretty big, and if you have any pull towards like addictive behavior whatsoever, I would definitely force yourself to stick to business mode as much as you possibly can. Do not be kind of tempted towards the flex mode thing. If you're looking at that and you're like, I don't know if I could handle that, I don't think I have the level of self-discipline to really do that, don't worry about it. Just set business mode and go forward from there. And for what it's worth, my personal approach here is kind of a mix between these two things, with a much heavier siding towards the business mode side of things. I can't let a session slip into a 36-hour long grind session, even if the game is incredibly good. I just have other family things going on. I have children, I have a wife. Like, it's just not going to happen for me. I have other business responsibilities. Like, I need to have some sort of cutoff. But if in my head I go to start a session, I'm like, okay, it'll probably be like a 3 or 4 hour long session, but the game is still super good. I have really big edge. I don't mind if I sleep in an extra hour or two the following day. Then I might be a little bit more flex, and a 4-hour session then becomes a 7-hour session if it's worthwhile. So there is kind of a mix between these two things, but still a heavier bend towards the business mode side of things. Whatever that's worth, for some people that might work. Again, for others, just choose the ethos and the model that is best for you and what is going to work for you in your life and your health overall. All right, question number 2 comes from Louis Q, who asked the following: how do people who have full-time jobs typically balance play and study? When I played tournaments, I found I went too far down the study route and would spend a lot of evenings studying without really putting in enough volume. Now I've moved over to cash games and have more flexibility, so if I have 1 hour free I can play, and I found I'm going the opposite direction. Is there a typical percentage split between playing and studying? So unfortunately, I have to give the answer that everyone loves to hate: it depends. And it really does. There's not a static answer I can give here on a play to study ratio that's going to work for everyone. So here's the way that I would think about it. When you are newer to poker and you're really trying to develop a strategy, if you play right this moment, you definitely don't have an edge, then you should definitely be prioritizing the study side of things and then playing a little bit. So maybe it looks like 90% of your poker time is being spent studying in the very beginning when you're trying to develop that overall strategy, and then playing the other 10% give or take. And this is really good when you have business mode turned on. You're like, okay, I know that I have 1 hour a day that I can dedicate to poker. This is when I'm going to do it. And then you can divvy up your time within that hour very nicely based upon a play to study ratio that works for you. And again, it's going to be heavily based around your current edge. So if you're on the other side of the spectrum, right, you do have a very well-defined edge, you know where your edge is coming from, things are going quite well, it's very conceivable that you might be on the opposite side of things, where you're playing 90% of your poker time and studying the other 10%. And then let that number be fluid. So as your win rate maybe starts cracking back to break even, all of a sudden you're like, I'm not really sure if my edges are exactly what I think they are. I'm not 100% sure where my edge is coming from in this game, or hey, I'm trying to prepare for moving up. Then that number might shift back into something like 50-50. So again, half of your time is being spent playing, the other half is being spent studying. That can work really well. And again, it's kind of this ebb and flow and fluid thing based upon your current edges in the game and what your overall goals are with poker in general. The more that you're planning on trying to move up, playing against tougher players, the more you want to probably throw some extra study into your overall ratio. That's probably going to work better for you. And for what it's worth, the reason why I can't give you a static answer to this question, I can't just give you a static ratio to always use, is because edges in poker are not static. So say you've stumbled across something that's working super well in your games, you develop quite the edge, why not leverage that, play it as much and as hard as possible, really increase your play time, decrease your study time until the player pool catches up, in which case then you can start shifting back into maybe something that's like 70% play and 30% study, whatever. Again, these are more fluid numbers and you have to be very, very aware of your edges at that moment. And for what it's worth, if you're not aware of your edges right this moment, now is a really great time to spend the next 15 minutes and take stock of where are your edges coming from. If you're making money right this moment, how are you making money in the game? What in your playbook is allowing you to generate profit? A lot of players really don't have an answer to that question, and if you don't, spend the next 15 minutes. Think about that, ponder that, write it down if you can, and then review that. And then do this exercise, I don't know, once a month, give or take, and it will really help you start saying, okay, I'm not really sure, I should probably prioritize studying a little bit more right this moment. And again, that's okay. This is a fluid thing. It will ebb and flow over the amount of time that you play poker. All right, moving on to question number 3, which is asked by Gang Jins. We have the following. How do you know when you're ready to move up stakes? In my case, I'm a recreational player playing to no limit and playing 2 tables of it. I bought in for $20 total and ran it up to $50. When should I move up to 5NL? Alright, so here again is the answer that everyone loves to hate. It depends. Sorry, there's no one-size-fits answer for this one, so let's go into what we should be thinking about when it comes to shot taking and really bankroll management overall. So the first thing I would suggest is something that pretty much nobody does, but I think it's 100% worth spending 15 to 20 minutes doing. Document your bankroll management process. Document what your bankroll is right this moment, what you're playing, how many buy-ins you have for that limit. Document when you think you should be moving up. Document when you think you should be moving down in your current state. Document if you did move up and you played there for a couple of months, when do you think you should move back down? And if you run really well at this limit and the next limit, when do you think you should consider moving up? Have a documented bankroll plan, and this is going to be hyper personal to how much money you have dedicated to poker right this moment, what your earning power is, how much money from like a paycheck you could dedicate towards a poker bankroll. And again, it doesn't have to be like physical separation, but it has to be mental separation between your poker money and your real life money. So if you don't have this kind of document, I would highly suggest working with one, creating one real quick, and really thinking about what your numbers look like. And for most people, this won't be the exact same because this is highly dependent on your own income earnings and what you think those will look like in the future, and also on your own personal kind of comfort limits. Not everyone is comfortable being a very, very aggressive shot taker, so you might want to have more buy-ins available before you consider taking shots. That's okay. You just want to make sure that it doesn't get egregious, and we'll talk about what egregious looks like in a few minutes. So one of the first things you want to have defined when it comes to taking shots, and you should have this in your bankroll management plan as well, is if you take a shot, how many buy-ins at the next limit up are you willing to lose before you move back down to your quote normal limit? And common advice typically looks like, okay, if you have somewhere between 10 to 20 buy-ins for the next limit, then maybe you take somewhere like a 2 to 3 buy-in shot. If you lose those 2 to 3 buy-ins, just start playing your normal game again and move forward from there. But a lot of players don't actually do that, or they wait far too long, or they don't really have a plan in mind of when they're going to stick to the next level up. When are they going to actually, quote, move up there, and that's going to be their new default limit. A lot of players don't have any of those kind of things defined, so have those things defined. Now, obviously, if you have 10 buy-ins set aside for the next limit up, which is the parameter set in this question, right, they have a $50 bankroll right this moment, they're thinking, when should I start taking shots at 5NL? Well, you know, if you take a 3 buy-in shot and that goes poorly, it's aggressive. But if you, say, had $100, then taking a 2 or 3 buy-in shot is very, very easy, very fine. And even if you say don't win in that shot and you lose those 2 to 3 dedicated buy-ins, you go back to your normal limit of 2NL, like you still have plenty of buy-ins for that. You rebuild there, get back to a shot taking dedicated bankroll, and then you start taking shots at 5NL again as soon as you get back to 100 in the bankroll. So, you know, the level of aggression you want to go here is going to be a comfort thing. I think for most players, though, they wait until they have 50 or 100 buy-ins for the next limit up, and I would definitely definitely suggest not waiting that long. It's just not a good strategy overall. Because I'm going to be honest with you, one of the things that really holds players back, especially cash game players, why they really never make any progress in this game, is that they fail to take shots aggressively. So think about the player who's currently playing 10NL and they're thinking, I will start taking shots at 25NL once I grind up to a $2,500 bankroll. Like, it will take so impossibly long to build up to a $2,500 bankroll at 10NL. So you're really never going to get to the shot take in the first place. And again, it's not like you should take shots at 25NL when you have a $75 bankroll. Rather, if you're never taking shots, how are you really going to make progress? It's going to take an incredibly long time to generate the full bankroll for the next limit up. So if that's the way you're thinking about it right this moment, I would massively suggest changing that idea. Again, think about your comfort levels and your actual money. Don't just take like a general overly aggressive bankroll strategy, especially when it comes to taking shots. But really, if you're like, okay, I need to develop a full bankroll at the next limit up before I even take a shot, that is massively problematic, and it's just going to hinder making really any progress in this game. You're just going to be playing the smallest limits on a site or in a poker room pretty much forever, and that's not where you want to be. Now, all of that being said, let's just say you do have a proper bankroll size for taking some shots at the next limit up. There are two possible reasons why you might not. I think it's important just to touch on these briefly. First one is that you're not really confident that you have an edge at the next limit up. You're pretty convinced you're actually going to be a losing player at the next limit. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. That's part of what taking a shot in the first place is going to do. But if you are truly convinced that you just don't have an edge at the next limit up, this is when you would start changing that play to study ratio. Make sure you're studying more so that way you can get to the point where you're like, yes, I could take a shot at the next limit. I'm not going to be the worst person at that table, and I can start figuring things out and going from there. Number two, kind of related, is you just don't have the confidence or the mental ability to be able to handle it. Either handle the monetary swings or handle the next limit up and playing against better players, whatever it is. And if that's the case, again, you've identified a leak in your game, you've identified a leak somewhere in your mentality, and as such, put some time and effort into fixing that. So again, don't put yourself in a situation where you're just going to massively increase your overall risk of ruin. Like if a shot goes poorly, you're just going to absolutely destroy your bankroll. Still have to have discipline and awareness of your edges and your mental game, etc. But definitely keep these things in mind. If these things are holding you back, put some time and effort into them. They are going to massively pay off in the long run if you work on them now. And then just a couple of other little tidbits to touch on here. If you play a lot of tables, and I know most people don't play 24 tables anymore, but let's just say hypothetically you were, when you're taking shots, you're probably going to need some slightly higher bankroll standards, just because you actually, for logistic reasons, need to make sure that you have full buy-ins plus rebuys available for all the tables you're playing. But if you say, hypothetically, normally play 24 tables, if you're going to start taking shots, I would suggest playing fewer tables so you can focus on them, so this really shouldn't be too much of a logistics issue overall. The other thing I will mention is if you're playing on fast tables, things like Zoom, then I would be a little bit more aggressive with your bankroll strategy overall, since you're probably only playing one, maybe two tables of that. So keep all of that in mind. And in response to Hero's specific question at the top, if I had a $50 bankroll right this moment and was currently playing 2NL and thinking about when to take shots at 5NL, I would take a 2 buy-in shot right this moment. If it goes poorly, rebuild it at 2NL. If it goes well, consider moving up to 5NL as aggressively as possible and taking shots at the next limit up. Two reasons for this. One, I don't want to wait until I build a $100 bankroll at 2NL, which is going to take a very long time. There are almost certainly better things I could be doing with my time. And two, you have to remember that the rake ramifications are typically terrible at the lowest limits. So getting out of the absolute rake traps that are the super micros is something that I am very interested in doing quickly, and also making better expenditure of my overall time at the poker tables. So hopefully that helps. And that is going to wrap it up for this episode. Hopefully all of this helps. I know some of these questions were kind of all over the place, but at the end of the day, making sure you're working on these things, thinking about these things between sessions, and really considering writing down and doing the document work that we kind of talked about in this episode will help you a tremendous amount and really force you to understand what your current comfort levels are, what your overall plan is, have some objective accountability because you now have a document in hand, and then move on and go forward from there. So again, hopefully this helps. You can always, again, ask your questions, post hands, and jump in the greatest poker Discord out there, redshippoker.com/Discord. Join for free and jump in the conversation today. I look forward to seeing you over there. As always, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you back shortly with a brand new episode. And in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.